Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Motes. It's the end of the year. I hope everyone had a fun and festive holiday season. And for those who don't celebrate the holidays, I hope you had a pleasant beginning of the winter. My family's Christmas this year was a bittersweet one, but it was really nice getting together, playing some board games, looking at old photos, and remembering some of our favorite memories. And some of my favorite memories involve the podcast, the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Today we wrap up the 4th season of the show. It's still unbelievable to say that. I really never thought that I would be doing the show for this long. You listeners have heard me say it before. I expected to do the podcast for 5 months, 6 months before losing interest, but it's still going strong after 4 years. And that's a testament to the responses from you listeners. It's just been a lot of fun. Now on today's show, we wrap up the Callista story. Leia meets in secret with a shadowy organization on a remote world that wants to join the New Republic. But of course, the leader of that group has a much different agenda, one that threatens the entire galaxy. Meanwhile, Luke searches for Callista, tracking her to a planet full of strange life forms, a world where the Force itself seems more tangible and dangerous than anywhere Luke has ever been. It's Planet of Twilight by Barbara Hambly, the third and final book of the Callista Chronicles. But before we get into the book, it's listener question time. I have 2 emails today. The first comes from longtime listener Robin. Robin says, "One criticism that I have about the prequels is that Viceroy Newt Gunray is not a good bad guy. His main motive is greed. He's a coward who tries avoiding any consequences. He's pathetic and hardly somebody to scare the audience on Halloween. When Anakin kills him in Episode 3, it's just black comedy. It's not revenge. Most people don't even know that he's a reference to Star Trek. Nimoy equals Neimoidian. Here are some ideas of how I think he could be a more interesting character. Number 1, give him hidden Force powers. Number 2, make him a killer. Number 3, make the Neimoidians more like classic invaders like the Sith of the Old Republic. Number 4, make him the godfather of the Gunray clan. And number 5, make him an old acquaintance of Darth Plagueis. What do you think?" Well, thank you very much for the email, Robin. So I understand you wish Newt Gunray, Lot Dodd, and the rest of the Neimoidians to be scarier. But there's a very specific reason the Trade Federation is the way that it is. When George Lucas was working on the script for The Phantom Menace in the mid-1990s, here in the United States, the Republican Party took control of both houses of Congress for the first time in 4 decades. Now, their leader was Newt Gingrich. He was elected Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he promised to cut taxes and government regulations across the board, making it easier for big corporations to ignore a lot of the safeguards that had been in place for years. Lot Dodd was named after the Republican leader in the U.S. Senate, Trent Lott. Anyway, Lucas didn't like these guys, and he really didn't like what he thought was happening here in the U.S., that businesses, corporations, and the government were becoming intertwined, and that the corporations were gaining way too much influence over public policy. That's why Newt Gunray and Lot Dodd are portrayed as corrupt and greedy politicians, because at the time, Lucas thought that Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott represented a threat to America, one that used the powers within the government to bring that government to a standstill. And of course, that's what we saw take place in The Phantom Menace. The Trade Federation, a corporation, was somehow given its own representative in the Galactic Senate, It used its money and influence to tie Chancellor Valorum's government up in miles of red tape and basically made it impossible for the Republic to come to the aid of one of its own members after it blockaded Naboo. Now, today's second email comes from @the_caffeinator, who says, in episode 1, when Watto rolled his chance cube to decide which slave he would wager against Qui-Gon Jinn's ship in the pod race, did Qui-Gon unintentionally change the fate of the galaxy by using the Force to manipulate the cube to pick Anakin? There was nothing to suggest the cube was rigged, so what would have happened if Qui-Gon hadn't interfered and if the cube chose Shmi Skywalker instead? I can see Watto not caring if Anakin was trained as a Jedi while still his slave on Tatooine, since he could use that to promote his businesses. What are your thoughts? Well, thank you very much for the email @the_caffeinator. I don't think Qui-Gon Jinn unintentionally changed the fate of the galaxy. I think he very much intentionally changed the fate of the galaxy. I don't think there's any scenario in which Qui-Gon was going to leave Tatooine and return to Coruscant without Anakin. Now, for the sake of discussion, let's say he didn't use the Force to influence the Chance Cube. It comes up red instead of blue, and Qui-Gon wins Shmi's freedom. First, I don't think Shmi would go anywhere and leave Anakin as Watto's slave. Second, I think when it was time to leave the planet, Qui-Gon would have just found a way to get Anakin out of Watto's shop and leave Tatooine with both he and his mother. Remember, Qui-Gon had to get Anakin in front of the Jedi Council because he thought Anakin was the chosen one. So, in my opinion, there's literally no way that Qui-Gon was going to allow that Chance Cube to come up any color other than blue. Thanks again for the questions, Robin, and @the_caffeinator. Now, listener, if you have a question for the show, send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky @swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, you can record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time for today's book, Planet of Twilight by Barbara Hambly. Grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins in the remote Corios system, a system of planets that is not a part of the New Republic. Chief of State Leia Organa Solo is meeting the political leader of Nam Corios, Seti Ashgad, whose father, also named Seti Ashgad, almost wielded as much political power in the Republic as Chancellor Palpatine did in the days prior to the Galactic Empire. Ashgad represents the Rationalist Party, a group of settlers who came to Nam Corios to escape Palpatine's reach. Now, conditions are harsh in the Corios system. Organized crime syndicates serve as the system's nominal government. Piracy is rampant. And on Nam Corios, specifically, conditions are extremely primitive. It's mostly a cold desert world, where the settlers, represented by Ashgad, known as the Newcomers, struggle against the Therans, the descendants of the planet's original settlers centuries ago. The Newcomers want to open up Nam Corios to trade with other worlds, while the Therans want the planet to remain isolated, going so far as to shoot down any ships larger than a starfighter from landing or taking off from the planet. Ashgad pleads with Leia. He says the Therans are making the situation on Nam Corios intolerable. Living conditions are terrible. There's very little food or water. But the planet does have one natural resource that could be used for trade. Smokies. They're crystalline, mineral-based life forms that can amplify and reflect light. Ashgad and the Newcomers want to trade the crystals for supplies, but the Therans refuse to allow it. Leia listens to Ashgad's arguments, but honestly, she pays more attention to Ashgad's secretary, a small man named Zim. Zim seems odd for a secretary. He speaks in a whisper, doesn't take any notes, occasionally interrupts Ashgad, and keeps looking out the viewports at the other ships in Leia's entourage. But regardless of how strange Leia finds the little man, she remains focused on Ashgad's proposal. Unfortunately, she says, she can't interfere in an internal argument on a planet that isn't a member of the New Republic. Ashgad leaves the meeting unsatisfied, and he and Zim head back to their small shuttle. Leia escorts Ashgad to the hangar, where she peels off and heads over to talk to her brother, Luke Skywalker. Now, Luke secretly came on the mission with Leia after his sister received a strange message from his former love, Callista. The message said, "Do not trust Ceti Ashgad." It was the first time anyone had heard from Callista since she had disappeared following the battle with Admiral Dalla at Yavin 4 more than 8 months ago. Luke came along because if Callista is somewhere on Nam Corios, he wants to find her. Luke takes a B-wing and flies down through the planet's atmosphere. He gets a strange sensation. The Force feels weird here. It's kind of fuzzy. Suddenly, blaster bolts zip past Luke's B-wing. He tries to dodge, but one hits him, and the ship loses altitude. Luke uses the Force to help slow his descent, and he crash lands safely. Now it's time to look for Callista and find another way off this planet. Strange things start happening in Leia's fleet once Luke leaves. People begin getting sick, but they don't test positive for any type of pathogen. And there's no poisons or toxins or biological or chemical weapons detected anywhere. However, quickly, people start dying. Leia herself starts feeling weak. She stumbles down a corridor and almost faints. Then, out of nowhere, Zim appears, along with a few of Ashgad's guards. They don't appear to be affected by whatever is happening on the ships. Zim orders the guards to take Leia with them. The guards then program the fleet to jump to light speed, but without any coordinates for coming out of hyperspace. When Leia awakens, she finds that she's being held prisoner at Ashgad's estate on Nam Corios, and she discovers her water is being drugged to try to keep her calm. Secretly, Leia stops drinking the water and tries to befriend the man who keeps bringing her food, an older man named Lygus. Lygus starts bringing Leia some fresh water, and he gives her some advice. Stay in the sun on the balcony as much as you can. The light keeps the Drox away. It turns out there's one other life form on Nam Corios besides the Smokies. Drox. Now these are little parasites that live in the shadows. They're not quite insects, and they're not quite arachnids. But they do make you sick. When Drox bite their host, they burrow under the skin and dissolve in the host's bloodstream. Lygus says the Drox can make a person very weak. They can even kill you if enough of them latch on. Elsewhere on the planet, Luke's crash is discovered and he's taken in by some of the settlers. They tell Luke that he must have been shot down by the Therans. The Therans outnumber the newcomers and control the large anti-aircraft cannons positioned across the planet. Luke asks if anyone has seen Callista, and the settlers tell him that someone matching her description was working for a woman named Tesselda in the capital city Hueg Shul. While they're talking, Luke feels a disturbance in the Force. He looks around and is shocked to see a lightning storm race across the ground. The lightning strikes a speeder, destroys it, kills the drivers, and then speeds off into the distance. Luke realizes that the storm is a reaction to his use of the Force to stop his B-wing from crashing. That's why the Force feels so weird here, Luke thinks. The planet reacts whenever anyone uses it. Back at Ashgad's estate, Leia is summoned from her room and taken before a Hutt named Beldorian. The Hutt tells Leia that he used to be a Jedi. He says he was sent to Nam Corios 4 centuries ago with another Jedi, but when the two arrived, they realized how strange the Force manifested itself on the planet. Beldorian says the other Jedi went mad, and he took control of Hueg Shul. The Hutt says he ruled until Seti Ashgad and his followers arrived 40 years ago. Now, Ashgad's son rules the capital. But Beldorian is still plotting. He wants Leia to help him overthrow Ashgad and allow him to take back control of Nam Corios. Luke finds Tesselda and discovers that the woman is a Force user. She says Callista came to her to help learn how to reconnect with the Force. But Tesselda says Callista was stolen by Beldorian, who wanted the former Jedi's help to overthrow Seti Ashgad. Tesselda tries to influence Luke into going after Beldorian to recover her stolen lightsaber. After initially falling for her story, Luke breaks the woman's spell. He realizes Tesselda is insane. She can't possibly help him find Callista. Leia escapes her room and sneaks around the complex. She overhears Ashgad and Zim talking about their plans to join forces with Imperial Moff Gitelis and the Lornar Corporation, a defense and droid contractor in the Meridian sector. Ashgad has been selling Smokies for use in Lornar's new starfighters, tiny needle ships that don't need a pilot to fly. Leia also notices that Ashgad looks different. He looks older. His hair is gray, and his face is wrinkled. Leia watches as Zim opens his robes. She sees that the little secretary's chest is covered by what looks like giant sores, but sores with teeth. Ashgad kneels before Zim. Something comes out of one of his chest openings, and it gives sustenance to Ashgad. The politician rises, and Leia can now see that he looks like he did when they were on her ship. Horrified, Leia realizes that she wasn't negotiating with Ashgad the Son, but with the original Seti Ashgad. Zim has been doing something to keep the man young. Leia returns to her room where she discovers her lightsaber. Lygus must have put it there. What that means, Leia doesn't know. But now that she has the weapon, she starts planning her escape. The next day, Leia ties her bed sheets together, throws them over the balcony, and scales down the side of the estate. She heads off in the direction of one of the large cannons. That's a little more than 10 kilometers away. There, she's taken into custody by the Therans. They take her before one of the local clan leaders, whose voice sounds familiar to Leia. It's Callista. Luke sneaks into Ashgad's estate where he finds the steps leading up from the cellar teeming with Drox. They're everywhere, and they're feeding on someone. Luke ignites his lightsaber, and the bugs retreat. He finds Lygus, who tells Luke about Ashgad taking Leia and about Leia's escape. Luke loads the man into an old speeder, and the two head off to hide in a series of caves overlooking Hueg Shul. Callista tells Leia everything about Ashgad, Zim, the Drox, the Smokies, and the history of Nam Corios. Callista says Zim is actually a Drox that Beldorian's chef genetically modified 250 years ago. The chef took one of the Drox, spliced its genes with some other creature, and raised it as a pet. When Zim grew large enough, he discovered he could telepathically control the other Drox. Zim killed the chef and started using the Drox to feed on the Therans. But when Seti Ashgad and his settlers arrived on Nam Korios, he wanted to use Zim to return to power. The two entered into an agreement. Zim would keep Ashgad young by giving the politician back some of the life energy the Drox absorbed in exchange for Ashgad getting Zim and the Drox off planet, away from the crystals that magnified the planet's sunlight and giving Zim an infinite number of life forms to consume. Callista says the Therans understood how dangerous the Drox would be if they were released to the wider galaxy. That's why they refuse to allow ships to land or take off from the planet. And that's why they won't let the newcomers enter into any trade agreements with the New Republic. The story ends with a battle at the cannon that Callista's group is guarding. Ashgad tricks a group of newcomers into attacking the cannon while he and Zim try to sneak away in a shuttle. The fighting is fierce, but Leia and Callista eventually stop the fighting and explain to the newcomers how they've been manipulated. However, the battle was just the diversion that Ashgad needed. His shuttle breaks orbit, and he contacts Moff Jatelli. He's ready to open Nam Korios up for the Lornar Corporation to mine the planet for Smokies. But just then, Han and Lando arrive leading a New Republic fleet. They destroy the shuttle, stopping Zim from releasing a plague on the galaxy. In the aftermath, Luke communes with the largest of the intelligent crystals, called Tsils, who ask that all their brethren be returned to Nam Korios to keep the Drox in check. Our heroes return to Coruscant, with Luke finally realizing he needs to stop chasing Callista and return to the Jedi Academy. Time to take a break. When we return, I'll talk more about Planet of Twilight. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But allow me to recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Queen's Hope tells the story of Padme Amidala undertaking a secret mission during the Clone War, while her handmaiden and best friend, Sabe, doubles for Padme in the Senate. It's a fast-paced tale that's a fitting end to the Padme Amidala Queen's trilogy. That's Queen's Hope by E.K. Johnston. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today I'm talking about Planet of Twilight by Barbara Hambly, the third and final book in what many fans call the Callista Chronicles. This story wraps up the great romance of Luke Skywalker and Callista Ming. Those of you who have listened to the last two episodes on Children of the Jedi and Darksaber know the history of Callista and how Lucasfilm wanted the author, Barbara Hambly, to create the great love of Luke Skywalker's life in Legends. Of course, after Children of the Jedi was released, the fans' negative opinions about Luke and Callista and the positive fan opinions about Luke and Mara Jade coming out of the Heir to the Empire trilogy caused Lucasfilm to change course during the writing of these three books, and Callista went away. Hambly wrote Children of the Jedi, the first book in the series. Kevin J. Anderson wrote Darksaber, the second book in the series, and then Hambly comes back to wrap the series up in this book, Planet of Twilight. For the most part, these three books are not looked at very highly among many Legends readers. I tend to agree with that opinion. But when looking at this story in particular, Planet of Twilight at times does not feel as connected in the trilogy as the first two stories. I say trilogy, it's not an official trilogy, but most people consider Children of the Jedi, Darksaber, Planet of Twilight a trilogy because we get the entire story of Luke and Callista's relationship. We know that after Children of the Jedi was released, Lucasfilm asked Kevin J. Anderson to somehow make sure that Luke and Callista were separated by the end of Darksaber. The way Anderson does that, for me, makes it feel like Luke has allowed Callista to be free. That he recognizes that the two of them can't be together as long as Callista feels that she is somehow a detriment to Luke. Whether or not Luke feels that, and Luke does not, he is very adamant that he does not care that Callista has lost her connection to the Force. But Callista feels that Luke has a higher calling to reestablish the Jedi Order in the New Republic era. And if he is constantly trying to focus on Callista specifically regaining her ability to use the Force, it is going to take away from the time and energy and focus that Luke needs to have in order to train the next generation of Jedi. That's the feeling that I got, at least, when Darksaber ends. That's kind of thrown away here in Planet of Twilight. That Luke now has decided that after about 8 months have passed, and Leia has received a letter from Callista. It's just a very short message that says, "Do not trust Seti Ashgad," that Luke has to go searching for her again. And it does not seem to connect for me with Luke in the previous book. I almost wish Hambly would have left Luke out of this book on some level. Especially considering his plot line in this book is almost on par with Leia's. Instead of there being like an A plot and a B plot, it's almost like Leia's plot is 1A and Luke is 1B. They're almost on equal footing in the story. I think maybe if Hambly would have left Luke at the Jedi Academy, she could still have had Leia come in contact with Callista on Nam Korios. Callista could still give Leia all the information that she does. Callista and the character Lygus in this story, they are the two exposition characters. They give the reader all the information that the reader needs in order to fully understand the story. I think that could still happen. There would be other changes that Hambly would need to make, but I don't think that would have been that difficult. But with how disconnected this story feels, and with the overall reception of Callista and the relationship between Luke and Callista, it's understandable why these three books are generally thought of in a negative light by Legends readers. I wonder when you read this book if the change was so abrupt and it affected the story of Planet of Twilight so completely, so much, that on some level it wouldn't have been better to simply cancel the book. I mean, I never advocate for something to be canceled. I never advocate for a creator to not put something out, for an author not to write something. But Planet of Twilight, it could just be skipped. I mean, I like this book a little better than Darksaber. It's not for the plot, honestly. It's more Hambly's writing style versus Anderson's writing style. But if you are reading the story of Legends, once you got to the end of Darksaber, if you wanted to skip Planet of Twilight and head straight into the next book, The Crystal Star, it really doesn't change anything in the Legends timeline. Planet of Twilight really has no effect on any of the books that directly follow it. Much later in the timeline, we go back to Nam Corios, and spoiler alert, we even see Callista again. But none of the events of this book affect that. It is really strange in that sense. And I think that's why this book feels disconnected to the overall story. This book is also a little more on the science fiction side of the Star Wars spectrum than what I normally prefer. I like a mix of the sci-fi and the fantasy, but for both sides, I like it a little softer. I don't like going full sci-fi. I don't like going full high fantasy. I kind of like it in that middle squishy part. And I think Hambly's writing in both Children of the Jedi and Planet of Twilight lean more science fiction than I'm generally comfortable with in Star Wars, but I think this book specifically. We have a sentient sort of bug type creature, whether the Drox are insects or arachnids. I think they're a little bit more sort of a combination arachnid crustacean than anything else, but really they're just icky bugs. And we learned that Zeem is a genetically modified one of these bugs who has grown enough over 250 years to achieve sentience, and he can control the other Drox. He can use them to drain the life forces of the beings around him. He can then take some of the life forces he has drained and give them back to people, like he does to Seti Ashgad, to make him younger again. The Force is made physically manifested on this world. Whenever someone uses the Force, you get storms powering up somewhere else on the planet. The one you see specifically in this book is the lightning storm that comes flashing over the hills. It destroys a speeder, kills 2 people. And then you have the living crystals, which in some way is very similar to the Kyber crystals that we know in canon. Planet of Twilight was released in 1997. The first time we learned that the Kyber crystals are in some ways attuned to the Force, was in the Clone Wars animated series that began in 2008. I believe the stories with The Gathering are in like 2011. I can't remember exactly when the Gathering arc is, but it's similar. It's not the same, but it is similar. You have semi-sentient crystals that can interact with the Force. Those of you that have listened to most of my episodes know that that is one of the few things in canon that I am not a fan of, and I was not a fan of it here in Legends when we came across the Smokies in this story. However, not all of my opinions about this book are negative. I like some of the story of Leia in captivity at Ashgad's complex. I like how we see inside of her head as she is slowly piecing together what is going on. She becomes aware that they are drugging her water. She becomes aware that Ashgad and Zim are not what they seem. She becomes aware of Ashgad's guards not being what they seem. It turns out they're human replica droids that have just some living flesh mounted on their droid chassis. Makes them look human. Leia uses her ability to connect with people to slowly bring Lygus over to her side and eventually enlists his help in allowing her to escape. It's the one part of this story that I think is done really well. So, that wraps up the Callista Chronicles. Children of the Jedi is my favorite book of the three. I don't think any of the three books are some of the better books in Legends. I think Hambly's writing is solid. I wouldn't mind seeing her get another crack at writing for Star Wars. I think maybe her editors need to ask her to tone down some of the extravagant descriptions she gives for everything. I also think she would do better writing in Star Wars for a book that's much more of a character study rather than a book that's an adventure. Because for me, her adventures do not move as quickly as I like to read. I think she does really well with the thoughts that the characters have, with analyzing a situation, with the conversations they have with each other. But for me, she's a little slow moving the plot along. So, that wraps up the year. Listener, if you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. Send me your questions, your opinions about the books we've talked about on the show this year or at any time in the past. Or if I said something that you disagree with, let me know. I'll read it on the podcast. And keep sending in your Star Wars character groupings. Your fighter squadrons, your Mount Rushmores, your road trip crews, the actors and actresses that you envision playing these Legends characters. Send them all in. I love reading them for the show. Now, coming up after the new year, we start the 5th season of the podcast. It's going to be an interesting year for the show. We're going to start out by jumping back into the past with a pair of stories from the Old Republic. And then we're going to focus in on a pair of scoundrels reading the old Lando Calrissian and Han Solo adventures. After that, it's the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy, followed by the Hand of Thrawn stories. And finally, we delve into the 9-book Legacy of the Force series. I hope to have a bunch of co-hosts on for those books and maybe for some of the other stories throughout the season. On the first episode of the new year, we're going to jump back 25,000 years to the earliest novel in the Legends timeline, Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void by Tim Levin. You can look forward to that episode coming out on January 10th. And now, listener, I'd like to end today's show just a little differently. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that the holidays this year were a little bittersweet for my family. That's because my dad passed away in the middle of December. Dad went to the doctor on November 1st, and he was told he had stage 4 renal cancer. It was incurable, untreatable. It shocked the entire family. My dad, most especially. He didn't even know he was sick. Anyway, Dad's health deteriorated quickly, and he passed away on December 15th. He was only 67 years old. We had his funeral just 2 days before Christmas. Now, my dad and I had pretty different personalities. We didn't share many of the same interests, but we shared a love of baseball. We followed the Baltimore Orioles. And we both loved stupid dad jokes. Dad wasn't a big fan of Star Wars, but he knew that I loved it. And anytime he saw something on TV or something in a store or just somebody walking around wearing a Star Wars shirt, he'd point it out and say, "Hey, Aaron, look, it's Star Wars." It was his way of staying connected to me. Now, I could tell you a lot of stuff about Dad, but the best thing about him was this. He loved his family. He loved being a dad. He loved being a grandfather. He always said it was the greatest thing in his life. And he loved my mother. They were married for 47 years, and Dad cherished every day that they had together. The biggest difference between my dad and I was that I'm much more of a reserved person than he was. Dad was an open book. He would tell you exactly what he thought in each and every situation. And he told us he loved us every day. Now, normally I'd never answered, but that didn't stop him from saying it every time he saw me. I guess the one good thing that came from his passing is that it forced me to open up more. I told him I loved him each day I visited him in the hospital. I'm 46 years old. I'll be 47 in February. I know many of you listeners know what it's like to lose a parent or a close loved one. But this still hurts. I cannot describe how much I miss my dad. I know things will get back to normal eventually, but it's going to be tough. Come the spring, Mom and I will be watching nearly every Orioles game together, and we'll be reminded about how Dad would cheer for every run the O's scored, how he would scream and holler at the TV at every mistake they made, and how he would clap every time they won. listener, thank you for letting me talk a little bit here at the end of the show about my dad. Don't worry, it'll be right back to the normal formula of the show when it comes back after the new year. Until then, listener, may the force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in legends. I love you, Dad.